is Programme Director of the World Architecture Festival, but I always say we're all global, but actually we can only be in one place at any one time. Even Skyping, you are actually somewhere. We're here tonight. It's my pleasure to introduce Christopher Lee from Serie Architects, practitioners with offices in London and elsewhere, but in the modern globalised fashion. Christopher also teaches at Harvard, is an author, an academic, as well as being a practitioner. Please welcome Christopher Lee.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much, Cliff, Ken, for inviting me. Thanks, Paul, for the introduction. I'll jump straight into it. Really, I think the theme that we're discussing today, design and geography, in a sense have in its basis affected, or in a sense created, by the conditions of globalization. And I would argue that in the field of design and architecture, one distinguishing factor that creates this condition is the way in which capital flow and also the ability of capital to accumulate has increased tremendously because of what David Harvey famously called the space-time compression has increased as well. So in a sense, I think you would see that architecture, or the production of architecture, is incredibly affected by this and is characterized by, I would say, three principal characteristics. One is that it creates a certain homogeneity, in which Saskia Sassen has also discussed in the global city, in which at different global locations, architecture or the built environment seems to be the same. And conversely, the second characteristic is that this sameness, in a way, creates extreme difference in the context in which this building, for instance, the CBD, is located. So sameness and difference, homogeneity and contrast is two sides of the same coin as a result of globalization. And I would argue for the past 10 and 15 years, the way in which a lot of architects and architecture has responded to this need for market differentiation by focusing largely in the quest to create novelty or difference out of novelty. And I would say that it is a tendency that has created situations like this, a certain banalization of architectural culture, but also in the quest of creating difference, create a banalized, homogeneous architectural culture that focuses on the external appearance and the form, and also is completely subservient to the logics of real estate rather than to the culture of architecture. So I would argue that my generation, or the younger generation of architects, in a way see ourselves as being global architects from the onset when we graduated. And in a sense, I would also argue that it is not quite a new phenomenon. Designing here for projects over there has been with us for quite a while. And I think a very good example is the work of Le Corbusier when he was confronted with the project in Chandigarh, when he was asked by Nehru to give an expression for modern India. So in a sense, the brief calls for both, on the one hand, modern, but also something that is unique to India. And I would argue that Corbu's response in Chandigarh is, in a way, encapsulates certain values that I also share. That is, his architecture here is both ancient and modern, and both universal and yet specific. And I would argue that the reason why it is so is that Corbu, unlike his earlier proclamation of having a clean break with history, I would argue also with Kuhn has argued this, that the work of Corbusier is incredibly related to the past and incredibly drawn from precedents from the past. So here, I think if you look at, if you are familiar with the plans, the middle, of course, is the building that I showed you, Assembly Hall in Chandigarh. To the left is Schinkel's Altus Museum, and to the right is Masjid Jama in New Delhi. We could say that here Corbusier not only draws from the precedents of Schinkel, but also from the precedent of Masjid Jama, that is to say, a cloistered building with a figure in the center of the cloistered building. Nevertheless, there's also a certain commonality and universality of the 5 points that Corbu has outlined in his early career. So this is why I would say that Kubu's response, in a sense designing over here for projects over there, is one that brings a certain unique specificity to the culture and to the site that he works with, but on the one hand also have a certain universal grammar in which the architectural community and also the user could allude to. So for our work, we try to do that as well. How could we take the most typical element and to reduce that most typical element into an irreducible structure that allows the life, the context of the city to present itself. So this is the project we did a couple of years ago in India, in Mumbai, that is used. The brief was to renovate a disused colonial building in the race course. We drew on three typical elements in Mumbai. The first one, of course, is the great Victorian structure that you find in most, the wrought iron structure in most stations. The second was, of course, the beauty of the site, which is the external volume that is covered by rain trees. And the third is the use of naturally ventilated veranda space. So to take those three typical elements and also typical way of the way in which people use the space and to collapse them in what we would call a common artifact. One that is unique in a sense to its culture, but one is also universal in its reference. Another project, I would end with this, is a competition that we won in which this is the groundbreaking ceremony is in 2 months' time. It's for a court for the Singapore subordinate courts. Here we designed the high-rise court as an open platform building, and in which I would argue that again it draws on two or three typical elements of the city of Singapore. One, of course, is the high-rise. Two is the granularity of the shophouse, and three is Singapore being a tropical city that places a lot of importance in garden and landscape. So here the high-rise is rethought as an open platform building without a facade, an open structure, naturally ventilated, in which the courtroom boxes take on the hue and the color and granularity of the shophouse, and of course the platforms becomes a therapeutic space for the public and for the court users to enjoy and to take repose in the stressful proceeding of the courtroom. So therefore I would argue that the way in which we approach shares a certain values that we draw from Corbusier, in the sense that looking at architecture as a common framework in response to the challenges that I argued previously in terms of challenges posed by globalization. I'll stop here. Thank you.